Now to Oakland's former police chief, Howard Jordan. He's going to actually be joining us in just a few minutes to kind of talk about Oakland's past history with protests and also the officers that are trained to de-escalate this kind of thing. And that's what you're seeing right here. You're seeing a number of protesters, maybe in the hundreds right now, obviously carrying signs and chanting and face-to-face with law enforcement, but they're not crossing over, and obviously the police are kind of holding their line. So I believe we do have Oakland's former police chief, Howard Jordan. Good evening. Can you hear me? It's Juliette, Goodrich,
yes,
and Ken.
I can.
Thanks for joining us again. You know, we were talking earlier when we were discussing what was happening in San Jose. Well, here we go. In your home area, Oakland, you know this very well from past protests and how law enforcement handles it. So right now we're at a position where you have hundreds of protesters out there. Law enforcement holding a firm line right now, holding a formation. Obviously, they're trained to de-escalate these kind of things. So what's your take on how things are right now and how you can keep things from progressing into violent matters?
Well, obviously, I see the officers maintaining a very tight skirmish line. They're exercising, again, a lot of restraint. They're giving people an opportunity to express their First Amendment rights, which is, required. And I thought they were being very measured. The footage I'm seeing in front of the Oakland Police Department appears to be deputies from the Alameda County Sheriff's Department. So they are probably responding to a request from the city for mutual aid or mutual assistance. And they have worked side by side with the Oakland police officers for many years, dating back to probably 20 years ago, as far as I can remember. So this is not unusual territory for them. They have the resources to support local law enforcement agencies in the county, and unfortunately, most of this resources will go to the city of Oakland.
Obviously very familiar territory with Occupy that has happened in years past. And I'm just curious, though, with, an acting police chief, now we've gone through a number of police chiefs, as you know. The recent incident with a fired police chief and now an acting one. So how does that stand with law enforcement when you've got a situation like this and you have a new regime kind of holding down the fort while there's been a lot of takeover?
Well, it doesn't really impact the rank and file officers that are on the front line because the policies, the procedures, and the practices really hasn't changed. Chief Mannheimer is a very accomplished chief. She has came through the ranks in San Francisco and then to San Mateo, so she knows what she's doing. I'm sure that she'll be giving the command staff and the incident commanders the proper direction. Again, nothing really has changed in terms of the tactics and the process and procedures. The officers still have to exercise due caution, be safe, and maintain, give people an opportunity to exercise their First Amendment rights. And if they violate those, if they start committing crimes, then the officers have the right to defend themselves and to also take appropriate action to preserve life and property.
Yeah,
Chief, it's Ken Bastida back here. Good to talk with you again. I wanted to ask you, Chief, about the training that officers get, because we're seeing a protester right now holding a sign just inches away from a police officer's face shield there. And I asked Tony Rivera, another chief across the bay, one time, how do you guys deal with that? How do the men and women of these departments deal with this? What kind of training do they get? He says, hey, you got to remember, we have protests every single day in these big cities. Yeah. So they get a lot of experience, don't they?
There's a lot of experience. It also comes with the type of training they receive in terms of de-escalation. When you sign up to be a police officer, one of the characteristics that you have to show is that you can't overreact to situations. A normal person would probably have done something a lot differently, would not have been that patient. But as a police officer, we expect you to be professional, to be calm, You know, people aren't going to like what you're doing. They're not going to like what you're saying. But as long as you remain professional and calm, because I'll tell you that if something happens or an officer overreacts in this particular situation, even though they're being taunted, then things can escalate very quickly. And then, you know, you'll be describing an incident where someone gets hurt or an officer gets hurt because they are because of some overreaction. So, you know, if the officer can tolerate it, which it appears that he can, you know, that's certainly better than trying to overreact. But at some point, if they begin to break the law, then those officers will have no choice but to arrest the people that are breaking the law in this particular case.
Yeah, obviously it looks like they're holding, as you call it, their scrimmage line, and the protesters are kind of standing back as well. And keep in mind, you know, this is Alameda County, where we're only in phase 2, where businesses are still closed, and the majority of restaurants and hair salons and all of that, people aren't supposed to be out. And so on top of this protest going on, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and also clearly no social distancing as well. And obviously that has to weigh on everyone that's out there. But right now it's a message that they're trying to put out to the public, a universal message that these protesters are trying to do, I assume.
Yeah, and this is going to be something that I think public health officials throughout the county or wherever these demonstrations are happening, that some of the unintended consequences of these demonstrations is to just watch what happens in the next couple of weeks, and whether the infection rate increases. As you know, Alameda County has seen a tremendous increase in COVID-19 cases over the last week, and this will add to that, because there's no way to really get away from the fact that some of these people that are up close and personal, even the ones with masks, could be carriers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no question about it. Chief, I want to ask you, I want to get your reaction to what you saw in Minneapolis when you saw the video, and again, we're getting video shot by bystanders, and it may not be the best vantage point, and we're going to allow for that, but just your gut reaction to what happened and how the police in that particular suspect encounter behaved, and the training they either lacked or overstepped.
Well, that entire incident was unnecessary. When you really look at some of the parameters or the reasons behind using force, not to get legal here, but you know, the landmark Supreme Court decision that really governs how officers are supposed to use force is Graham versus Connor, and it calls for a 3-pronged test. And the first issue that's at hand is the nature of the incident. So if you look at the nature of the incident involving Mr. Floyd, he was passing a $20 counterfeit, or allegedly a $20 counterfeit, which is, you know, what we call a paper crime. It's not a violent crime. And I don't know what happened afterwards, but obviously the final frame analysis that took place, the one we saw, where the officer had his knees on his neck for, I believe I saw something where it was roughly 8 minutes or 5 minutes or so. Either way, it was too long, it was unnecessary, and it appears that he was already handcuffed. So really the threat of Mr. Floyd causing injury or continuing to flee, there were 4 officers that surrounded him. I don't think he was going anywhere. And the worst part that I saw was that they heard him pleading for help, and they ignored it. Okay? And they did not. They could have easily just provided, just taken the officer's knees off his neck, and he would probably have been alive today. But none of that happened. So I think it's totally inappropriate. It was unnecessary force, and I believe that the actions that were taken over the last 3 to 4 days were appropriate in terms of dismissing the officers and filing charges. And I think that is a sure sign that departments aren't tolerating this level of misconduct any longer. And I think that should be noted. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, it was obvious that they had bystanders there filming it, you know, because we see the video, other officers standing by. So do they face, what consequences do they face for not saying, hey, enough?
Well, I don't know about what the consequences are in Minneapolis. I can tell you my experience within OPD and some of the other agencies that I've worked with since I retired. The officer that stood by and didn't report is just as guilty as the officer that actually committed the crime. In some cases, even worse. There's an old saying, the cover-up is sometimes worse than crime. So a lot of departments stick to that. I'm not speaking for Minneapolis because I don't know what their policies are. I'm just telling you from experiences that I've had, and particularly in Oakland, where we want officers to intervene. We want officers to come forward and report misconduct. So when you don't, I've taken action where we've punished the officer who allowed it to happen more than we actually punished the officer that that violated the policy.
Interesting. Chief, you know, some people have surmised that the city may have, they sort of dragged their feet. They let several days go by. Now, a lot of this has to go through the district attorney's office, and investigators have to take a look at exactly what happened and interview people. So it takes a little while, but it was several days before somebody was arrested, before somebody was charged. Did they drop the ball? Should they have reacted quicker? And did their inability to react quick enough, did that add to the situation we're seeing tonight in Oakland?
Well, I don't know what would have happened if they acted quicker. Again, I don't know what evidence they have in front of them. I mean, from the plain language of just looking at what happened, it appears that there was at least enough probable cause to make an arrest. And I think what also compounded this is that the fact that none of the officers, I believe, provided a statement explaining what happened. So when you don't have an explanation from the officer, then the district attorney is left to gather evidence and put a case together based on other evidence, right? So other eyewitnesses accounts, physical evidence. I don't know if they were wearing a body camera or not. Other footages from other places, collecting that information and establishing enough probable cause to make sure that the officers are charged and prosecuted. And as much as we want to, you know, throw these officers to the court system, they're entitled to due process just like everyone else. Okay, so it's horrible and it's not good, and I think justice will prevail in the end with the way it's going to prevail. But you know, they have a due process right as well, and they have a right to an attorney. They have a right to be be aware of their charges. They have a right not to make self-incriminating statements, and they have all the other things that comes with due process, just like any other person on the street who gets arrested. So I don't know what the decision process was in Minneapolis. I can only speak from my experience, again, being involved with law enforcement here in California, that sometimes it takes a while to develop the evidence, to gather all the information in order to make an informed decision, so that, you know, so that when you do file charges, that the charges are able to sustain those charges. Because on the other hand, if there's a rush to judgment and a judge decides that, well, you don't have enough probable cause and they don't think that the officer should be held to answer, then the DA now has to release that person, and that just compounds the matter. So I think it's clear that they wanted to take their time to make sure that the evidence they have supports the charges that they're going to file.
One more quick question, and then we're going to let you go, Chief. Thank you for your time tonight. Your reaction to seeing the 3rd precinct going up in flames in your career as in law enforcement, did you ever think you would see a police station overrun like that? No, that is not right. It's unacceptable. We understand the outrage. We understand that, you know, people want justice. I sympathize with them, but burning, looting, rioting, and violence, burning buildings, police buildings, that is unacceptable behavior, and it should not be tolerated. Very well. Howard Jordan, former police chief of Oakland, we appreciate your time. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your service, too. You were a great cop. You were a better chief.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. Good talking to you, okay?